He thought it was just another day at the shop until he helped a child in need. Days later, when a private jet landed looking for him, he realized his kindness had changed his life forever. The sound of grinding metal and the scent of engine grease filled the air as Jake Miller wiped the sweat from his forehead. The small-town mechanic had been working since dawn, fixing old cars that barely held together. It was just another day, until the bell above the shop door jingled. Jake glanced up, expecting another customer with a beat-up truck. Instead, a woman walked in, pushing a small wheelchair. In it sat a little boy, no older than 7, his legs thin, his small hands gripping the armrests tightly. The mother looked hesitant, her eyes darting around the shop. "Excuse me, I was told you might be able to help." Jake set down his wrench, wiping the grease from his hands. "What seems to be the problem, ma'am?" She sighed, looking down at the chair. "My son's wheelchair is broken. The front wheel keeps sticking. We don't have the money for a new one, and no one around here knows how to fix it." Jake knelt, inspecting the chair. The front caster was damaged beyond repair. The frame itself had dents, and the motorized system, though old, just needed a little work. "How long has it been like this?" he asked, glancing up at the boy. The child hesitated before whispering, "A month." Jake's chest tightened. A whole month? He could see it now, the frustration in the mother's eyes, the quiet embarrassment on the boy's face. They had been turned away before. Jake stood, rolling up his sleeves. "Well, you came to the right place. I'll fix it up, no charge." The woman's eyes widened. "No, we can't ask you to do that for free." Jake smiled. "You're not asking, I'm offering." The boy's face lit up with pure joy. Jake didn't hesitate. For the next 3 hours, he worked on that chair like it was $1 million sports car. And he had no idea that just days later, a private jet would land in town looking for him. Jake wiped the sweat from his brow as he tightened the last bolt on the wheelchair frame. The little boy sat patiently watching every move, his eyes wide with fascination as the mechanic worked with practiced precision. It had taken longer than expected, but Jake refused to rush. Every piece had to be just right. Every wheel had to move smoothly. Every wire had to be secure by the time he was done. The old, worn-out chair looked almost new, sturdy, reliable, something the boy could actually use without struggle. Jake knelt beside the chair and gave the wheel a small push. It spun effortlessly, no more sticking, no more squeaking. He grinned. "There you go, kid. Good as new." The boy's mother covered her mouth, her eyes misting over in disbelief. She had expected a quick fix, something temporary, but this was more than that. This was someone taking the time to make sure her son could move freely again. She took a shaky breath. "I don't know how to thank you." Jake waved a hand dismissively. "Don't worry about it, just happy to help." The boy beamed as he rolled forward, testing the chair's movement for the first time in weeks, his small hands gripping the controls, excitement lighting up his face. "Mom, look, it moves so easy now." Jake chuckled, watching him roll around the shop. His joy was contagious. It was moments like these that made all the long, exhausting hours worth it. This was why he did what he did. The mother turned to Jake, her voice filled with sincerity. Most people wouldn't have done this, especially not for free. Jake shrugged. "Shouldn't have to be that way." She hesitated, then reached into her purse, pulling out a few crumpled bills. "Please take this. It's not much, but it's all we have." Jake stepped back, shaking his head. Not a chance. Tears welled in her eyes, but before she could argue, the boy rolled up to Jake with a wide, toothy grin. "You're the best, mister." Jake ruffled the kid's hair with a small smile. "Take care of that chair, all right?" The mother mouthed a silent thank you before guiding her son out of the shop. Jake watched them go, a strange warmth settling in his chest. He didn't need money for what he had done. That smile on the boy's face was payment enough. He turned back to his tools, stretching his arms. He had a few more cars to work on before closing time, but even as he returned to his usual routine, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about today had been different, special. And he had no idea that only a few days later something would happen that would turn his entire world upside down. Because kindness always comes back in ways you least expect. 3 days had passed since Jake had fixed the wheelchair, and life had gone back to normal, or at least that's what he thought. He had spent those days under the hood of old trucks covered in grease, working long hours to keep his small shop running. The memory of the little boy's smile still lingered in his mind, but he hadn't thought much about it beyond that. To him, it had been a simple act of kindness, nothing more. But everything changed when a black luxury SUV rolled into his shop parking lot, followed by something that made Jake do a double take. A private jet landing at the small-town airstrip just a mile down the road. Jake wiped his hands on a rag, stepping out from behind the counter as the SUV door swung open and a man in a sharp suit stepped out, his posture straight, his expression unreadable behind him. A second man dressed in an equally expensive suit stood by the vehicle, his hands folded in front of him like a bodyguard. Jake frowned. This was not the kind of place that attracted rich men in expensive suits. This was a blue-collar town. The only visitors were truckers and farmers. Definitely not the kind of people who arrived in private jets. "Can I help you?" Jake asked, his tone cautious but firm. The first man took a step forward, adjusting his cuffs before speaking. "Are you Jake Miller?" Jake narrowed his eyes. "Depends who's asking." The man extended a business card, the gold lettering standing out against the deep black background. Nathaniel Sinclair, CEO of Sinclair Industries. Jake blinked. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but he wasn't sure where he had heard it before. "I own several major companies across the country," the man continued. "But more importantly, I'm here because of what you did a few days ago for a little boy and his mother." Jake's stomach flipped the wheelchair. The little kid, the woman's gratitude. Suddenly, it all made sense. But it didn't explain why a billionaire was standing in his shop parking lot talking to him like he was someone important. Jake crossed his arms. "Look, I was just helping a kid out. No need for all this." Nathaniel let out a small chuckle. "Trust me, this isn't unnecessary." "I don't believe in coincidences, Mr. Miller. I believe in rewarding those who do good when no one is watching." Jake stared at him, unsure of what to say. People did nice things all the time. Why was this such a big deal? The second man stepped forward, holding out another envelope. Unlike the business card, this one was sealed. Thick, heavy, expensive looking. Nathaniel nodded toward it. "Take it, open it, and then you'll understand." Jake hesitated before slowly reaching out and tearing open the envelope. What he saw inside made his breath catch. A cashier's check, 6 figures printed in bold ink. Enough money to change his life forever. Jake's grip on the paper tightened, his pulse pounding. What the hell is this? Nathaniel smiled, "A token of appreciation for what you did for my grandson." The words hit Jake like a freight train, his mind reeling. "Wait, grandson?" Nathaniel nodded. "That little boy in the wheelchair, the one you helped his mother, didn't tell you who we were because she didn't want special treatment. She wanted to see if there were still good people in the world. Turns out, she found one." Jake swallowed hard. He had done the right thing. Not because of money, not because of recognition, but because it was right. And yet here he was, standing in front of a billionaire, being handed more money than he had ever seen in his life. Nathaniel took a step closer. "I did some research on you, Jake. You've been running this shop alone since your father passed, barely making enough to keep it going despite the long hours and hard work. What you did for my grandson that day proved to me that you are the kind of man who deserves better." Jake's head spun. He had never asked for anything in return, never even thought twice about fixing that wheelchair, yet here he was, being offered a future he never thought possible. He looked back down at the check, his hands slightly shaking. This could change everything. And somehow he knew this was only the beginning. Jake stared at the check, his fingers gripping the edges like it might disappear if he let go. His mind raced with 100 different thoughts at once. This wasn't real. This kind of thing didn't happen to people like him. He was just a small-town mechanic, struggling to keep his shop open, barely scraping by while working 16-hour days, but now standing in front of a billionaire who had arrived in a private jet offering him more money than he had ever seen in his life, Jake felt like he had stepped into someone else's story. He exhaled slowly, lifting his gaze to Nathaniel Sinclair, who stood calm and composed, as if handing out 6-figure checks was just another Tuesday for him. Jake's throat felt dry as he forced out the words. "I don't understand. Why are you doing this?" Nathaniel smiled faintly. "Because I can, but more importantly because people like you deserve it. You could have ignored my grandson and his mother. You could have charged them a ridiculous price, but you didn't. You did what was right, not knowing anyone was watching, and that tells me everything I need to know about you." Jake shook his head, still struggling to process all of this. "Look, I appreciate the offer, really, but I don't need charity." Nathaniel's smile didn't fade. "This isn't charity. It's an opportunity." Jake frowned. "Opportunity?" Nathaniel motioned toward his SUV. "Step inside, let's take a drive. I'll explain everything." Jake hesitated. Every logical part of him screamed that this was insane, that stepping into a billionaire's car could only lead to something he didn't fully understand. But there was another part of him, the part that had spent years wondering if life would ever change, that told him to take the risk. Without another word, Jake folded the check, tucked it into his pocket, and climbed into the SUV. Nathaniel followed, shutting the door behind them as the driver pulled away from the shop. The city blurred past outside, but Jake wasn't focused on the scenery. His attention was locked on Nathaniel, who sat across from him, his expression unreadable. Finally, after a long pause, Nathaniel spoke. "I built Sinclair Industries from the ground up. I own factories, shipping companies, real estate, and most importantly, luxury auto brands." Jake raised an eyebrow, not sure where this was going, and I need someone like you. Someone who actually understands what it means to build something with their hands. Someone who knows what it's like to work from the ground up. Jake let out a dry chuckle. "You offering me a job, Mr. Sinclair?" Nathan smirked. "Not just any job. I want you to run one of my top-tier automotive repair divisions, oversee the training of mechanics, work on high-end cars, and ensure that every person who walks through our doors is treated the same, whether they drive a $1 million sports car or an old pickup." Jake's heart pounded. A job working with luxury cars, leading a team making real money, doing what he loved. He hesitated. "Why me? You could hire any expert in the industry." Nathaniel nodded. "I could, but none of them would be you." Jake swallowed hard, the weight of the decision pressing against his chest. If he said yes, this would change everything. And for the first time in years, change didn't seem so bad. Jake leaned back in the plush leather seat of the SUV, staring out at the passing city lights, his mind spinning with everything Nathaniel had just said. The idea of working on luxury cars, leading a team, being part of something bigger than a struggling repair shop in his small town, it was overwhelming. Part of him wanted to say yes immediately, to grab this opportunity with both hands and never look back, but another part of him hesitated. Because this wasn't just about fixing cars. This was about leaving behind everything he had ever known. He turned to Nathaniel, his voice careful. "You don't even know me. How can you be so sure I'm the right guy for this?" Nathaniel smiled. "I know enough. You didn't hesitate to help my grandson without expecting anything in return. You put in hours of work to make sure his wheelchair was perfect. You've been running that shop alone, working yourself to the bone just to keep it afloat. Men's like you don't come around often, and when they do, they're worth investing in." Jake exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "So, what you're saying is this isn't just a job, it's a test." Nathaniel's smirk widened. "Exactly. I don't just hand people opportunities. I hand them chances to prove they belong in a world that doesn't always open its doors to the right people. This is yours." Jake stared at him for a long moment, weighing his options. If he took the job, his life would change in ways he couldn't predict. If he said no, he would go back to his shop, back to long, exhausting days and just barely scraping by. The decision should have been easy, but nothing ever was. Nathaniel reached into his jacket, pulling out a sleek black business card with gold lettering. "Call me when you've made up your mind, but I'd make the call sooner rather than later, because chances like this don't wait forever." Jake took the card, feeling the weight of it between his fingers as the SUV pulled to a stop back at his shop. Nathaniel's driver stepped out, opening the door for him. Jake climbed out, glancing back at the man who had just turned his world upside down. "You don't seem like the type who's used to hearing no," Jake said with a smirk. Nathaniel chuckled. "I'm not, Because I don't offer things unless I already know the answer." Jake let out a slow breath, watching as the SUV pulled away, disappearing into the night. His fingers tightened around the card as he walked back into his shop, staring at the tools. The grease-stained floors, the half-finished repairs. This was his world, the only world he had ever known. But for the first time, he wasn't sure if it was where he belonged anymore. Because now he had a choice. And that changed everything. Jake sat in his shop long after the SUV disappeared, his mind racing with everything that had just happened. The business card in his hand felt heavier than it should, like it carried the weight of a decision that could change his life forever. He looked around the shop at the tools, the grease-stained floor, the old cars waiting to be fixed. This place had been his entire world since he was a teenager, working beside his father, learning every trick of the trade with hands covered in oil and sweat. But now for the first time he wondered if this was enough. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Part of him wanted to jump at the opportunity Nathaniel had handed him, working with luxury cars, leading a team, making real money instead of just barely scraping by. It all sounded too good to be true, but the other part of him, the part that had spent years fighting to keep this shop open, hesitated. Because if he left, who would be here to help the people in this town? The ones who couldn't afford fancy mechanics. The single moms who needed their cars fixed just so they could get to work. The old-timers who came in just to chat while he patched up their trucks. The sound of the shop door creaking open pulled him from his thoughts. He turned, expecting a customer, but instead he saw the little boy from a few days ago wheeling himself inside, his mother close behind. "Hey kid," Jake said, forcing a smile, "what brings you back?" The boy grinned, showing off the perfectly working wheelchair. "You fixed it so good, mister. It's better than new," Mom said. "We had to come back and say thank you again." Jake chuckled, kneeling beside the chair, glad to see it still holding up. "But you didn't have to come all the way back just to say that." The mother stepped forward, her eyes filled with something deeper than just gratitude. "No, we did." She hesitated, then took a slow breath. "You don't know how much this meant to us. I was at my breaking point that day. I didn't know what to do. I had called everywhere and no one was willing to help, but you did, without hesitation, without expecting anything back. People like you don't just fix things, Jake, you change lives." Jake's throat tightened as he stared at her words failing him, for the first time in a long time. The boy looked up at him with bright, hopeful eyes. "Are you going to keep fixing stuff for people?" Jake hesitated, his fingers tightening around the business card in his pocket. For the first time, he knew his answer. He smiled, ruffling the kid's hair. "Yeah, kid, I am." That night, Jake pulled out his phone, staring at Nathaniel's number for a long moment before finally dialing the call. Barely rang before a familiar voice answered. "I was wondering when you'd call." Jake smirked, shaking his head. "You knew I'd say yes, didn't you?" Nathaniel chuckled. "I wouldn't have made the offer if I didn't." Jake took a deep breath, then let it out. "All right, I'm in, but I'm bringing my skills, my way of doing things. And if I see anything that doesn't sit right, I'm speaking up." Nathaniel's voice was full of amusement. "That's exactly why I chose you. Welcome aboard, Jake." Jake hung up, leaning back in his chair for the first time in years, feeling something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. His life was about to change. But no matter where he went or what he did, one thing would always stay the same. He would always be the man who helped the people who needed it most. And that was something money could never change.